Welcome back to Creepy Nights, where darkness speaks and silence listens. Tonight's story will leave a mark, if you're brave enough to hear it. Turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and let's begin. Have you ever boarded a train and realized halfway through the journey that something on it doesn't belong? Something not human? That was the question that haunted Claire when she stepped onto the 11:45 p.m. train to Chicago. It was a freezing November night, the kind of night when the fog clung to the tracks like a living thing. She had almost missed the last train out, but managed to sprint across the empty platform and slip inside just as the doors hissed shut. At first glance, the car looked ordinary. A handful of passengers sat scattered in their seats, faces half lit by the dim fluorescent bulbs overhead. The train hummed to life, jerking forward, and Claire settled into a corner seat near the back. But almost immediately, she felt it. A heaviness. A presence. As if someone or something was watching her. Claire tried to dismiss it as nerves. After all, she wasn't used to traveling this late at night. But as the train rattled down the tracks, she noticed strange details she couldn't shake. The conductor had passed through once to check tickets, but his eyes lingered on her too long, his expression unreadable, before he moved on. A man across the aisle sat stiffly, staring straight ahead without blinking. Another passenger, an old woman in a gray coat, muttered to herself constantly, whispering words that didn't sound like English. The strangest of all was a young boy sitting alone 2 rows up. His skin was pale, his head bowed, and he clutched something small in his hand. A toy train. The longer Claire watched, the more she realized he hadn't moved an inch since she boarded. Not a twitch. Not even the rise and fall of his chest. The fog outside grew thicker, swallowing the world beyond the glass. At times, it almost seemed like shadows moved within it, keeping pace with the train. Claire pulled her coat tighter. Something was wrong. She leaned toward the man across the aisle. "Excuse me," she said softly. "Do you know how long until the next stop?" The man turned his head slowly, too slowly. His eyes were pale, glassy, and his lips parted like he wanted to answer, but no sound came out. He just stared at her, unmoving. Claire recoiled. The lights flickered once, twice, then dimmed even further. A metallic groan echoed through the car, as if the train itself was protesting something. Claire glanced at the boy again, still motionless. But this time, his toy train wasn't in his hand. It was on the floor, right at her feet. Her heart skipped. She hadn't seen him move, not once. She bent down slowly, picking up the small toy. It was cold. Too cold. Like it had been sitting in a freezer. She looked up, intending to hand it back. But the boy's seat was empty. Claire's throat tightened. She scanned the car. He was gone. Just gone. The old woman in the gray coat suddenly stopped muttering. Her head snapped up, her eyes glowing faintly in the dim light, and she whispered, almost directly to Claire, "You shouldn't be here. This train isn't for the living." The words sank into Claire like ice water. Before she could respond, the train screeched violently, the lights went completely black, and every passenger seemed to turn their heads toward her at once, their faces stretched in unnatural ways, pale and wrong, as the darkness swallowed the car whole. And then, she heard it. A voice. Low. Whispering right beside her ear. "Why did you get on?" Claire froze, every muscle in her body locked as the whisper slithered into her ear. "Why did you get on?" Her breath caught in her throat. She spun around, but the seat beside her was empty. Empty, yet still warm, as if someone had been sitting there only a moment ago. The train rocked hard, almost throwing her from her seat. Then, just as suddenly as the blackout came, the lights sputtered back to life. The passengers looked normal again, or at least, mostly normal. The glassy-eyed man stared forward. The old woman had returned to her muttering, and yet, Claire knew. She knew what she'd seen, what she'd heard. Her heart pounded. She needed to get off at the next stop. Whatever this was, she didn't want any part of it. But when she glanced at the windows, her chest tightened. The fog was thicker than ever, pressed so close to the glass it looked solid. Worse, she realized with a shiver, it wasn't fog at all. It moved wrong, curling in shapes that looked like hands, like faces, pressing against the window as though they were trying to get in. She forced herself to look away. The conductor reappeared at the far end of the car, his boots echoing against the metal floor. He walked slowly, methodically, his cap shadowing his eyes. Claire's relief was short-lived. Something about his stride was wrong. Too stiff. Too deliberate. When he reached her row, he stopped. "Ticket." His voice was flat. Claire fumbled in her bag, handing him the crumpled paper. His gloved fingers brushed hers, ice cold, like touching stone pulled from a grave. He stared at the ticket for a long moment, then back at her. "You weren't supposed to board this train," he said. Her stomach dropped. "Excuse me?" But he didn't explain. He simply tucked the ticket into his pocket and moved on, continuing his slow patrol down the aisle. Claire watched him vanish into the next car, her hands trembling. She turned back, and her blood ran cold. The boy was back. He was sitting exactly where he had before, 2 rows up, head bowed, hands clutching the toy train that had been at her feet only minutes earlier. He hadn't moved a muscle. But now, his lips were moving, whispering. Claire strained to hear. It sounded like numbers, a countdown. 10, 9, 8. Her skin prickled. A countdown to what? Before she could move, the train lurched violently again, harder than before. The lights flickered, then dimmed until they barely glowed. A metallic screech roared from beneath the floorboards, as though the entire train was grinding against the rails. The old woman shrieked suddenly, pointing a gnarled finger at Claire. "It's her! She doesn't belong!" Every head in the car turned to face her, their eyes, too pale, too wide, locked onto her all at once. Claire's chest tightened as panic clawed up her throat. "Stop it! Leave me alone!" she shouted, rising to her feet. But they didn't stop staring. Not a blink. Not a breath. She backed toward the connecting door, desperate to escape into the next car. Her shaking hands fumbled with the handle, but just as she pulled it open, the boy's whispering grew louder. 3, 2, 1. The train screamed. Every bulb overhead exploded, plunging the car into darkness. Passengers howled, not in fear, but in voices that were wrong, warped, as though a dozen throats were speaking in unison. Claire stumbled through the door into the next car. It was empty. No seats, no passengers, nothing but a long, narrow corridor lit by a single flickering bulb at the far end. The door behind her slammed shut with a finality that made her blood run cold. She turned, pulling desperately, but the handle wouldn't budge. And then she heard it. The steady click-clack of footsteps, approaching from the other end of the corridor. Slow, measured, coming closer. But the light flickered just enough for her to see that no one was there. Just footsteps, growing louder, closer, relentless. Her back pressed against the sealed door. Her heart thundered so loud she thought it might burst. And then, right in front of her, an invisible voice whispered again, "You should never have boarded." The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound itself. The single bulb above her flickered, buzzing faintly, as Claire pressed herself tighter against the sealed door. Her breath came in shallow gasps. She didn't want to move, didn't want to breathe. Then, tap. Something invisible brushed against her shoe. A sharp gasp escaped her lips. She stumbled backward down the corridor, even though she had nowhere to go. The faintest outline began to shimmer in the air before her, like heat rising off asphalt. At first, it was only a ripple. Then it began to take shape. A man's silhouette. Tall, broad shoulders, a long coat that seemed to sway though there was no wind. The air grew bitterly cold. Claire's voice cracked. Who are you?" The shape leaned forward. A whisper slipped from where its mouth should be. "The one who remembers." She bolted. The corridor stretched endlessly, longer than any train car could possibly be. Her footsteps echoed, swallowed by the oppressive dark. No matter how far she ran, the flickering bulb remained above her, unchanging. The impossible geometry made her dizzy. Finally, another door appeared ahead. She nearly sobbed with relief, slamming against it and fumbling with the latch. It groaned open. Claire stumbled into a new car, this one filled with passengers again. Dozens of them, men, women, children. Their faces were blank, featureless, like clay figures half-formed. They all sat perfectly still, heads tilted in the same unnatural angle, as though listening to something Claire couldn't hear. The door shut behind her with a metallic snap. She backed away, her heart pounding. "This isn't real," she whispered. "It's a dream. Just a dream." Then the passengers all turned their heads at once. Every single faceless figure swiveled toward her in eerie synchronization. Their necks cracked like dry branches. Though they had no eyes, no mouths, Claire felt their attention like a spotlight burning into her. She covered her face and screamed, "Wake up, please, wake up!" But nothing changed. One by one, the faceless passengers began to rise. The scraping of their shoes against the floor filled the air like a swarm of insects. They moved toward her, arms outstretched. Claire spun, grabbing the nearest loose object. An emergency hammer bolted beside the window. She yanked it free and smashed it against the glass. The pane spiderwebbed but didn't break. Again, another crack. A third time. This time, the glass gave way, exploding outward. Cold air rushed in. Beyond the window wasn't the outside world, though. No city lights, no moon, no rails, only endless black fog, roiling like storm clouds. Her stomach lurched. She had nowhere to go. The faceless passengers closed in, their fingers brushing the air inches from her skin. With a desperate cry, Claire hoisted herself through the jagged window, cutting her hands on the shards, and leapt into the darkness. She expected to fall, to tumble endlessly into the void. Instead, she landed hard on gravel. For a stunned moment, she lay there, chest heaving, staring up into pitch-black sky. Then she realized she was on solid ground. The tracks. She scrambled upright. The train was there, motionless on the rails. Its windows glowed faintly, shadows shifting inside. But the strangest part, it wasn't moving. The wheels weren't turning. Yet when she turned to look down the tracks, the scenery was sliding past. The trees, the signal lights. Everything was moving, except the train itself. Her blood froze. And then, behind her, she heard the whistle. Low, haunting. She turned. Another train was approaching. No, hurtling, straight toward her on the same track, its headlight burning white through the fog. Its roar was deafening, shaking the ground beneath her feet. Claire's legs wouldn't move. The train thundered closer, closer, the rails vibrating violently. She raised her hands to shield herself from the blinding light. And just before impact, she realized something impossible. The oncoming train had no engineer, no passengers. Every window was empty. Yet she could feel hundreds of eyes watching her from inside. And as the light engulfed her, she heard the same whisper again. "You shouldn't have boarded." The impact never came. Claire braced herself, waiting for the crushing weight of steel, for bone and blood to scatter across the tracks. But instead, the roaring train passed through her. The light blinded her. The scream of metal on rails shook her body. And yet, nothing touched her. She stood frozen in place as the monstrous locomotive tore past, each car a blur of shadow and emptiness. Her skin prickled with static as it swallowed her in its wake. When the final car vanished, silence returned. Claire gasped for air, trembling violently. The train she'd leapt from was gone. So were the tracks. She stood now in a barren field, flat and endless beneath a starless sky. The air was thick with the smell of iron. Her legs wobbled as she turned in circles. Nothing. No buildings, no lights, no sound. Just that endless black fog rolling at the horizon. Then, a faint click-clack. Her head whipped around. A track began to materialize only a few feet away, the steel rails glowing faintly in the dark. From the distance, a train approached. This one was smaller, slower, its single headlight weak and yellow. Claire hesitated, her heart pounding. She didn't want to board again. She couldn't. But where else could she go? As it drew closer, she realized something that made her blood run cold. It was the same train, the same cars, the same markings, even the same flickering light in the first window. It was looping back. With a screech, it ground to a halt in front of her, doors hissing open. Inside, the car was brightly lit, warm, even inviting. She saw ordinary passengers, chatting, reading, sipping coffee. It looked normal. Her legs ached, her lungs burned. Against every instinct, she stepped inside. The air was warm, almost comforting. A cheerful chime sounded as the train pulled forward again. Claire's shoulders sagged with relief, though her stomach twisted. Maybe it was over. Maybe she was safe. She slid into a seat and tried to steady her breathing. The man across from her glanced up from his newspaper and smiled politely. The old woman down the aisle was knitting quietly. A little boy played with a toy train. Her chest tightened. It was them. The same passengers, the same boy, the same old woman. Everything had reset, as though nothing had happened. Her voice was a broken whisper. No, this isn't real. The boy lifted his head for the first time. His face was pale, eyes sunken and hollow, and when he smiled, Claire saw teeth too sharp, too many. "You can't get off," he said softly. The old woman stopped knitting. The man lowered his newspaper. One by one, the other passengers turned toward Claire, their faces peeling open like cracked masks, revealing raw, twisted flesh beneath. The train lights dimmed to a blood-red glow. Claire bolted down the aisle, shoving past the inhuman passengers. She tore through the connecting door into the next car. This one wasn't normal either. It was a morgue. Rows of stretchers lined the car, each holding a body covered in stained white sheets. The air was heavy with rot and disinfectant. As she staggered forward, one of the bodies twitched. Then another, and another. Sheets slid away, revealing hollow-eyed corpses that sat upright in unison, their mouths opening in soundless screams. Claire stumbled backwards, slamming into the wall. Suddenly, the intercom above crackled to life. A voice spoke, calm, almost cheerful. "Next stop, nowhere. Passengers, please remain seated until your final destination." Her skin went cold. The corpses rose from their stretchers, shuffling toward her, their joints popping like broken hinges. She turned, sprinting to the far door. The latch resisted, but she threw her weight into it until it burst open. She tumbled into the next car and froze. This one was filled with mirrors. Floor to ceiling, every surface reflected her. Hundreds of her faces stared back, pale and terrified, every reflection slightly out of sync. Some moved a moment late, some didn't move at all, and one of the reflections smiled. The real Claire hadn't. Her reflection pressed its hand against the glass, lips curling wider and wider. The others began to follow, one by one, until every mirrored version of her was grinning with sharp, unnatural teeth. Her throat tightened. She backed away, but the reflections leaned forward as if trying to crawl through the glass. And then, the reflection that had smiled first whispered from 100 mirrored mouths at once, "You were never a passenger. You were always meant to drive." The mirrors rattled violently as if something inside them wanted out. Claire staggered backward, clutching her head. No, this isn't real. I'm not supposed to be here." But the reflections disagreed. They all leaned closer, pressing their palms flat against the glass. Their grins widened until the skin split at the edges of their mouths. One reflection whispered again, clearer now, "You were always meant to drive. Before Claire could respond, the mirrors cracked. Spiderweb fractures shot across every surface, the sound shrieking through the car like nails on metal. And then the glass shattered. Her reflection spilled forward, not as flesh, but as shadows. Black, writhing shapes poured out of the broken mirrors, wrapping around her like smoke. She fought, clawing and screaming, but the darkness seeped into her skin, filling her lungs, crawling behind her eyes. She collapsed to her knees. The train jolted violently. The intercom crackled again, calm and steady. "Attention passengers, your conductor has arrived." Her body felt heavy, her mind drowning in fog. She blinked, and suddenly, she was standing in the engine cab. The control panel stretched before her, dials and levers glowing faintly. The massive window looked out onto endless tracks vanishing into black mist. Her reflection in the glass wore a conductor's cap. "No," she whispered. "No, this isn't me." But her hands moved on their own, gripping the throttle. The intercom buzzed. The passengers' voices, dozens, maybe hundreds, spoke in perfect unison. "Drive us home." Claire shook her head violently. "I don't belong here, I never did." The voice returned, softer, almost pitying. "You boarded the train at 11:45 p.m., Claire, but you never left the station." Her blood froze. Memories bled through the fog. She saw herself running across the platform that night, late, panicked. She remembered slipping on the icy concrete, the blinding pain, the scream of brakes. Her heart stopped. She hadn't boarded the train. She had fallen beneath it. The passengers, the whispers, the looping ride through fog and shadow. It wasn't a nightmare. It was her crossing. This wasn't a journey for the living. It was a train that carried the dead. Tears stung her eyes as the truth sank in. She was never supposed to walk off this train. Not now. Not ever. The shadows coiled tighter around her arms, guiding her hands across the controls. The train roared forward into the void, faster and faster, as the passengers whispered in chorus, "The train must always have a conductor. Now it's your turn." Claire screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the endless whistle. The tracks stretched on forever, and she drove. The opening question: have you ever boarded a train and realized halfway through the journey that something on it doesn't belong, something not human? Wasn't about the other passengers at all. It was about Claire. She was the one who didn't belong, not alive, not dead, trapped between both. And now, she was the one who would carry others into the fog, forever.